tools that I have, we have our wire cutter, you guys are very familiar with from wedging. We have a small yellow sponge because it's small and it's yellow and it's a sponge. We have our toothed rib, so it has teeth on it, which is why we called it toothed, and it looks like the shape of a kidney bean or like a rib. So that's why it's called a rib. We use this to scratch and slip. We also have some wooden modeling tools. They're made out of wood and they help model the clay. They don't carve because they don't have any like blade or edge to them. They just help you kind of shape the clay. So that's why they're called wooden modeling tools. And then this one is called our loop tool. It has loops on either end and it's a tool. This is used to carve. This has an edge to it, it has a blade to it, and that's what kind of carves away the clay, it creates texture, and you guys will be using a lot of this during this project. And our other tool is the Sgraffito tool. So it has these two little styluses on either end, different sizes, and we use this to draw. It is a ball of clay, and you're gonna hold it in your hand. Do not put on the table because the table makes a flat surface. You want a rounded object. And go ahead and give me a thumbs up. Everyone, let's see it. Yes. And you're going to stick your thumb down into the middle of the clay. And I use like the back side of my palm to kind of give me leverage when I'm pushing down. And the reason why I also have you guys hold on to this clay is so you can start to feel the pressure that's on the back palm, so that I don't go through the bottom of my pinch pot. So once I feel pressure, I just stop pressing down. I leave my thumb in the ball of clay. Go ahead and give me a thumbs up again. And then give me a crab claw. This is what we're gonna be doing. We're gonna be crab clawing. So what that means is you're actually using like the longer, you're not using your fingertips, you're using like the pads of your knuckles, I guess, to kind of press against your thumb, and that's what creates the evenness of a pinch pot. And I just kind of rotate it in my hand all the way around. And then you can also start to kind of use your pads towards the bottom part and then pinching towards the top. So also make sure you're evenly distributing the pressure that you're putting on the clay. And again, this takes some time. I'm kind of rushing through just for demo's sake, but it's okay if it takes you like 10 minutes to make the head. You want to make sure it's nice and even, it's smooth. For my warm-handed people, you definitely want a spray bottle with you. You would spray your hands a little bit and then continue to work. How do you know when the clay is starting to dry out? So it's stiffer, but what else? What can you see?
Color change.
Cracks, maybe some color change, especially if it's starting to change color. It's definitely drying out on you. But any type of cracks that you're seeing is telling you that the clay is starting to dry out. Helping, making sure that the top of the head isn't too thick. I also can take some fingers and press into my palm, and that just kind of helps even out the thickness. Beginner pinch pots, they're always super thick on the bottom, and you want to try to avoid that. In order to attach details, arms, legs, eyes, hair, hats, clothing, anything that you want to add to it, you need to scratch and slip. So we have our slip container, and this is where the toothed rib comes into play. So we're only going to scratch the piece that we're attaching to our project. I know that you guys have been taught to scratch both, but what it comes down to is you just need some type of indentation for the slip to kind of seep inside of to help glue it together. And if you scratch both the object you're attaching to and the object itself, you just have more cleanup later on because we don't want to see the scratch marks. So it's a little bit of a neater application. So if I want to make an arm, and I roll out a little arm, what was the width? How far out can we go from the body? 5 inches. So if I'm looking at this and I have 2.5 being in the middle, my arm should not be farther out than here. okay? So if I try to attach this onto here, what's gonna happen? It's just gonna fall off, it's gonna crack, it's gonna break. We are working with gravity here. We can't work against it. Well, we are working against it, but we have to make sure that we're understanding that when things are not attached properly, it's just going to fall off, okay? So having like little arms, or if you want like spaghetti arms for some reason, you could always attach to one side and then have it attach to the body again, and that would ensure that it has two attachments attached to a static object so that it's not going to break. Okay, so I'll use the elephant trunk as an example. Some kids will have like this trunk that they want coming off this way. Gravity's not gonna allow that. So what you could do is actually have like something like this kind of happen so that it becomes a little bit more attached, okay? So just be smart about what you're trying to attach, because if it breaks and it falls off later on, we can't do anything about it. Once it dries, it dries. So if I'm gonna go ahead and shorten this little guy. And again, I'm making really basic shapes. I expect that you guys would make something a little bit more intricate. You could always take, again, it would be a fettling knife that I didn't grab, but you could take a fettling knife, cut it in half, and create some type of little joint. So it creates like the elbow and the arm and like the top, or the wrist and the top of where the arm is, something like that, and then attach it so it just becomes a little bit more realistic or has some more movement to it. So if I want to attach these two pieces together, how would I go about doing that? What do I need to do? Scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and scratch the part that I'm going to attach, and then I'm going to dip my finger and slip, dab it on. We can't be too stingy with the slip, because the slip is the glue that attaches the two pieces. If we don't use slip, when the clay starts to dry, it shrinks and they'll just shrink apart from each other and they'll fall apart. So you want to make sure you really add a good amount of slip, give it a little bit of a wiggle when you are attaching stuff, and then kind of smoothen the attachment with your finger or with a clay shaper or with a wooden modeling tool to kind of help attach that a little bit. So this is the shoulder, that's going to be the wrist, and then I'd go ahead and attach it like this. Okay, so again, I'm going to go ahead and scratch this little bit and this little bit, add some slip. Using a finger for the slip honestly is easier. Some kids use tools, but we only have so many tools in here. And then I'm going to give a little bit of a wiggle and a little bit of a wiggle. So I said before, it's a lot easier to add details or texture when the clay is a little on the stiffer side. So you want to attach things as soon as possible, but when it comes to like adding detail, you might want to wait until it stiffens up a little bit. So adding as much as you can and then waiting for the next class until you like clean things up. But I will be asking you guys to make sure that the seams of where things are attached are nice and clean, and if you have a hard time getting to a spot, a clay shaper helps. But we don't want like all this extra slip hanging out. We want to go ahead and clean that up using some type of tool or our finger, just to make it a little bit more cleaner. Things like fingers, like if I go ahead and try to add little fingers to this individually is gonna be really hard. So trying to create like, I don't know, like a little circle and then kind of like putting in little, they're not gonna look super realistic, but putting in little indents to kind of give the illusion of hands would work. Some kids have tried like eyelashes. It's done, but don't do it individually. You kind of have to create like a pad of clay and then cut away some of the clay to give the illusion of like a full lash. Same with hair. You have to kind of like, if you want like individual spikes, you can make individual spikes pretty easy. Just by kind of rolling out a ball of clay, creating a little, almost like a mini body that we just did, like that, and then scratching and slipping and putting it on. That would work. But if you want like a full head of hair, some kids have done like a really thin pad of clay and then kind of cut away at it to make it look like it's like flowing hair or movement. So that would work well. But just kind of think about like the delicacy of some of these details you guys are trying to do. You may have to kind of fudge it a little bit and like mess around, figure out the best way that works with the material that we're using. And how I said I really liked how you could actually see like the bone structure, so you actually give the illusion that the eye was within the eye socket. So what you can do is, what they did is they just kind of rolled out a little coil, and using your sgraffito tool, you could actually draw like where you would want the eye to be and where you'd want the little nose to end up, somewhere around here, and then kind of giving yourself a line to figure out where that eye socket would be. And it's like super light, you can't really see it, but I can see it. So then what I would do is I would kind of form this little coil, scratch and slip it, and then attach it to that area that I just did, or I just made. And then from there, you can actually smooth it in, so it becomes part of the body. So the arm, for instance, unless he's wearing some type of shirt, you want to actually smooth in the joint that's attached to the body, because we don't have seams where our arms are attached to our bodies. And that's the same thing goes for any type of facial feature. It should be almost smoothed in so it becomes a little bit more part of the body. It's growing from the body. So I would smooth this in all the way. And it doesn't have to be perfect for the first day that you do it, but just making sure it's really well attached. You can also impress. So I'm taking my thumb and actually pressing in right below where I just made that bone for the eye socket, and actually making the socket itself, so it creates a little bit more of an indent. And then taking another piece of clay, scratching and slipping, and then putting it on the inside. So just create something that's just a little bit more three-dimensional than just literally drawing on an eye. Okay. Same thing would go for like a nose. What's like the basic shape of a nose? A triangle, right? So you would just form the shape of a triangle, stick it on, then from there smoothen the attachments or smoothen the seams and start to kind of manipulate it a little bit more. The last thing I wanted to show you guys is how to make texture. And texture is so important when it comes to ceramics, because otherwise you have this smooth object and it's gonna be glazed, but there's no like interest happening. Sam has a really like textured sweater on. That type of texture would be really cool to put in your project. Also, if you're making like a dinosaur or a dragon or something with scales, it'd be really cool, or like fish scales. So what I like to use are the different size loop tools. The large one might not be the best option for you. We have smaller ones in there. But what you would do is you would actually take your tool, and the texture is one of the last things you would do to your project because it's kind of like the finishing mark. But you would take your tool and actually press into it. And you guys can kind of play around with different ways of pressing in the tool. Maybe I want this one so it's a little bit more, or a little less dramatic. Maybe I want the rounded one to do more like a fish scale. Again, using a smaller loop tool is going to give you a different effect. I also have the wooden modeling tools. Sometimes have these like teeth on them. You can also press those in to create some type of texture. The only tool that you cannot use to create texture is going to be the tooth drib. Do not use tooth drib to make texture. It doesn't look good. It creates all of these like little like burrs and like fuzzy, gross, sharp textures, and it's lazy. Okay, I want you guys to really think outside the box. You can pretty much use any tool in different ways to create some type of texture. Okay, besides the tooth drib. So you're gonna take your board that's wrapped in plastic. You're gonna put your another bag open on top of it. And then place your body and your head inside. Squeeze out as much air as possible. I know it's going to be a little tricky to do that. Do the best that you can. You'll twist. And then the rest of the opening, you guys could put like your slip container on top of it, or if you have more wedge clay, you can put it on top of it just so that it doesn't like reopen on its own. Okay. I also have had some students just kind of tuck it underneath the board itself. And then when they put it on their shelf, they just make sure this part is underneath. All right. But you guys can fit a bunch of other stuff on this board that kind of helps you keep everything tidy. You guys do have kind of a tight space, so you want to make sure to communicate with your neighbors to make sure you're not taking up too much space, or if you do need a little extra space.